My name is Carrie Allen, and I will introduce you to SQF and the business benefits of certification. Ryan Cosley, the Food and Beverage Technical Manager from DNV, will give you a detailed look at the path to certification. Tammy Van Buren, the SQFI Compliance Manager, will provide guidance on the foundation of a strong food safety management system with a discussion of the process of conducting an effective risk assessment. We are very pleased to welcome leaders from two food manufacturers to tell us about their food safety implementation experiences. They'll share their best practices and lessons learned. Tiffany Barlow is an independent entrepreneur and founder of Barlow's Foods, a specialty bakery mix brand. And Daniel Mora, the Quality Food Safety and Procurement Manager with Mad Mexican, an authentic Mexican artisan foods company. Both companies' products are sold through e-commerce, direct-to-consumer, retail, and wholesale. Thanks so much to our SQF 365 sponsor, DNV, for their longtime partnership as a licensed SQF certification body and for their support of SQF's programming and promotion efforts, helping brands large and small to ensure food safety with SQF certification. We also appreciate the support of the Hatchery in Chicago and Emerge CPG, two organizations which provide support to help launch early stage brands. Our program will begin with the presentations, and then we'll break out into two discussions. Topic one being the mind of the auditor and evaluating the risk assessment during the audit. And topic two, a discussion about preparing for regulatory inspection or certification audits with a strong internal audit program. These breakouts will be an opportunity to learn in more detail from our presenters on specific examples and experiences where you can ask questions in a group dialogue format. And we encourage you to participate by entering your questions in the chat. And then we'll wrap up with some final Q&A together in this main Zoom room after the breakout session. As always, when we have a forum that brings competitors together in discussion, we want to ensure that we stay in line with antitrust regulations. Please take a moment to review the antitrust statement that has been provided to you. If you need a copy of this statement, please let us know. But as a reminder, conversations regarding price fixing, boycotting, trade restrictions, or violations of antitrust law are to be avoided. If you believe that the conversation is in violation of antitrust law, please do speak up and we will do the same. SQF is a globally recognized certification program. We were originally developed in Australia in the 1990s by the Australian Food Safety Authority, together with stakeholders from industry. And this was done to establish common standards for food safety management. FMI acquired SQF in 2003 and has grown to more than 12,000 certified sites globally. FMI, the Food Industry Association, our parent company, supports the industry in a broad range of government relations, education, workforce, and market issues. SQFI brings value to the FMI retail and brand owner members by building trust in the supply chain for brand and consumer protection. SQF is what we call a farm-to-fork solution with food safety management codes designed for each sector of the supply chain. SQF is the only program to cover all sectors, as well as a separate quality certification, which allows for the use of the SQF Quality Shield on the package. The SQF Quality Program can be applied along with a certified GFSI benchmarked or equivalent HACCP-based certification, so that's a prerequisite. But when coupled with SQF certification for food safety, there's no additional cost to register for quality certification and typically does not add significant time to the audit. You can show your commitment to operational efficiency, customer satisfaction, and product quality with the SQF quality certification. SQF also has a starter program for small operations who do not meet full criteria for GFSI benchmark certification, but who do follow GMPs and have a food safety plan in place to manage risks. This is called the SQF Fundamentals Program, which is available in two levels. The basic level is focused on GMPs, and the intermediate level, which includes more advanced food safety requirements in preparation for future SQF food safety certification. Many retailers will accept SQF fundamentals for small suppliers as a global markets audit option. Retailers ask for SQF certification. It is the most widely used third-party certification in North America and is designed to be adaptable for many types of operations, from the simple one product operation to the very large and complex with dozens of processes and products. An SQF management system prepares suppliers to better manage operational risk, and when incidents do occur, certified sites are able to respond and recover more effectively. This is important for retailers, for brand protection and stability in their supply chains. Certification is good for your overall business performance due to the halo effect of implementing a program that drives a positive business culture of employee engagement and accountability. Managing your operation according to the SQF standard results in more consistent products, fewer consumer complaints, and reduced costs related to product failure. All of these positive benefits lead to expanded market access with retailers who require third-party certification program for products sold in their stores. Thank you so much for joining us and for your participation today. You will find that SQF and DNV are going to be the partners you need to achieve your food safety objectives. Now I'd like to formally introduce Ryan Cosley for his presentation on the journey to certification. Ryan, with 20 years of management and leadership experience, is a recent addition to DNV and has been in the certification sector, managing third-party certification programs for 8 years. His role is to ensure compliance and integrity of the DNV certification process and to recruit and develop auditors and technical resources for the team. Thank you, Ryan. Over to you.
He's muted.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, I'll start off by covering the comparison between GMPs and SQF. Currently, with GMPs, they're essentially a checklist audit. It's more so just checking to make sure you have certain things in place, like a pest control program, GMPs when it comes to hand washing, beard nets and hair nets, are they being used in the facility? It's just pretty much a cookie cutter audit. And when it comes to SQF, it's more of an involved audit. You're diving into your internal audit programs, making sure that corrective action management, root cause analysis, all those are a must with SQF. And it's much more advanced than the GMP audit. And with the SQF certification, it's more consistent and a continuous process. You're always looking for ways for improvement and ensuring that the standards and systems are working the way they're supposed to. And there's a big difference when it comes to management participation between a GMP and an SQF audit. For SQF, management needs to understand that SQF certification and management is required to have a culture of continuous improvement where they're constantly looking for issues to manage and ways to manage them better. And leadership has to drive that change. And getting certified with SQF, it's a cyclical process. Pretty much you start off, you're going to learn about the SQF code. You will register for SQF certification. You'll start to prepare for your audit. And during that time, you'll look for a CV partner throughout that journey to help you along, get your quote to find out how long your audit will be. And I'll cover most of this in detail a little later. And you would schedule and conduct the audit. Then you will start the process over because SQF is an annual certification. So you will have to do it every year. All right, preparing your site and staff with the audit duration is you want to make sure that you get to know the code and you want to determine what your food sector categories are. And you can find that information in the appendix of the SQF code. For an example, if you manufacture cookies, you would be bakery, and bakery is FSC 13. And the average SQF audit is 2 days, and your audit duration is several factors that goes into coming up with that audit duration. It's the size of your facility, the employees, and there could be other complexities throughout your audit. Maybe it could be multiple food sector categories and things of that nature that may cause your time to go, over the 2 days. And you will receive your final report and your certificate 45 days after the last day of your audit. And like I stated before, it's a yearly certification. So you would have to do it again in a year, but you should always be working and improving your program throughout the entire year. And the structure of the SQF code, Part A covers the food sector categories of that code. There are several different codes with SQF. So when you go to that code, on the front, you will see that when you go into that code, you'll see that code, what food sector categories that code applies to. There's also an area for the steps for achieving SQF certification, which I'll go to in a little more detail a little bit later. And also how you maintain your certification, what you need to do, what type of audits you need to have, what the scores are on your audit and things of that nature. And part B of the code is the meat and potatoes of the code. It's the standard. It's your the system elements and the GMPs for pertaining to whatever food sector category you're approved for. In the appendices, you can see there where it has I like it. It's a good chart that shows you what products go under which food sector category. And I use that a lot when I'm talking to customers, when they're trying to find out, where certain things fall and certain things that they do, or if they need to expand their scope, do they have to add maybe another code to do that? So I use that a lot. And the glossary is just definitions of terms that are used throughout the code, and also the logo rules and requirements for multi-site certifications, which are your growers and your storage and distribution facilities. And this chart pretty much shows you the mandatory clauses in the code. So these are some of the elements that they have to be implemented and audited for your food safety certification. And those mandatory elements cannot be exempted, and they can't be marked non-applicable. Okay, starting with.
Please mute your line if you're just joining. Please mute your line. Thank you.
Okay. All right, and there's a lot of background.
Participant Alcott, if you could please mute your line, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay.
There's a Zoom.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Now these are there's a lot of background noise. Okay. I think they're muted now. All right. So these are the steps to achieving SQF certification. And when starting with step one would be that you would need to register in the SQF database. And to be considered for SQF certification, you have to be registered, and you can go and register in the database. The database can be accessed on sqfi.com. And there's a fee for each site payable at registration, and it also has to be renewed annually. The fee scale is dependent on the site, and it's determined by the gross sales and revenue for that industry sector. And the fee scale is also available on sqfi.com. And you have to register your site prior to your SQF audit, because that's the way that we get the actual food safety checklist to conduct your audit. And you have to maintain that certificate you have to stay registered throughout your entire certification, because if you don't maintain that certification, the certificate will be deemed invalid until you properly register again on the SQF in the SQF database. Step two, which is really important, is designate an SQF practitioner, and also you have to designate a backup practitioner. And the practitioner is an individual designated by the site to oversee the development and implementation and review of your SQF system. And that ensures the integrity of your SQF food safety system. And that practitioner's responsibility is to communicate, all relevant information to the staff and make sure that the system is implemented properly. And the requirements for an SQF practitioner are described in the code elements 2114 and 2115. and it's auditable. So, and the practitioner has to be employed by the site, hold a position of responsibility related to the management of the site's SQF system. They have to complete HACCP training, be competent in the elements, and maintain HACCP-based food safety plans. And they have to understand that SQF code. So the practitioner will essentially be assessed throughout the audit, just making sure that they understand the code and understand what you're doing as a facility. And your food safety management system shouldn't suffer if the practitioner is out. So, and that's why that backup is very important. And they, they're pretty much just a second practitioner. So, and I know a lot of times we get calls when a site may say their practitioner is out. The first question we're going to ask them is, where's your backup? Because the code requires you to have a backup. Determining the scope of the audit, step 3. SQF certification is site specific. So it includes the entire site, any fields, orchards, sheds, premises, or buildings. Those have to be identified and included in the scope of certification. Food sector categories are used to ensure that the auditor who audits your site has those knowledge and skills. So if you're a bakery, we're going to send an auditor who's approved in bakeries to conduct your audit. And that's how that's why that's done. And that's why we need to it's essential that we know what categories you want to be audited to prior to that audit taking place. And SQF is also product specific. So within each food sector category, you have to identify the products. So if you are a bakery and you manufacture cookies, when you get your certificate, you will have that food sector category of bakery, but then you would also have that product of cookies listed on your certificate. And the scope needs to be agreed upon between the site and the certification body before initial certification. And it can't be changed after the audit takes place. And that's the reason. The reason being is what I stated earlier, that we have to send auditors that are approved for your category. So if you get to an audit and you want to add a food sector category and that auditor is not approved for it, it's not possible, because that auditor can't audit that a category that they're not approved for. And step 4, you have to document your SQF system. And really that's you have to make sure that everything, you have your documents. And one thing I do like about the SQF code is really descriptive when it comes to what you need. You see a lot implemented and documented throughout the code. So it's telling you this is what you need. This is what you need for this clause. And that's a big help. And you can kind of go through, and if you just read the code, you can tell immediately what you need to do and what needs to be done to conform to that clause. And step 5, implement your SQF system. It's pretty much say what you do. Your policies and procedures are documented, current, trained, and implemented. Do what you say. Train your employees to follow those procedures and monitor and prove it, with records, activities related to document procedures that are kept, reviewed, and maintained. And to have your initial SQF audit, SQF recommends that you have 90 days of records before you have that audit. And for step 6, a pre-assessment, it's an optional tool where you can use to kind of gauge where you are. Are you ready for an audit? And that can be done in several ways. You could use a consultant. You can do it internally. You can also reach out to a certification body, and they can have an auditor, an approved SQF auditor, come in and conduct your pre-assessment. And what I always tell sites is pre-assessments are what you make of it. So if you feel like your facility is good, it's looking good as far as like the actual facility, and you may have a few, document issues that you're unsure of, you can tailor that pre-assessment to what you need. So you can have it focus more on the documentation if needed, or more on the facility if needed. Step 7, you select your certification body. DNV, we're an approved SQF certification body. We're also 17065 accredited. your site will sign an agreement with us, with the CB, and the scope of certification, including any exemptions, will be done when in that agreement. The expected audit duration will be covered, and the reporting requirements, the certification body's fee structure, costs relating to the certification, and the responsibilities of the certified operation, which would be your site, and the responsibilities for us as a CB. And also, we will let you know the conditions under which your SQF certificate is issued, which could possibly lead to a withdrawal or suspension. And the auditor is selected by the certification body, and the auditor is required to be employed or contracted by the certification body, and also registered with SQFI for the food sector categories that your audit entails. And step 8, the initial certification audit. The initial certification audit is conducted by the auditor appointed by the certification body. Part of the audit could be conducted remotely, but at least half of the audit has to be conducted on site. And the certification body determines the audit duration based on size and complexity of the site. And as I mentioned before, typical audit duration is 2 days, but that varies depending on all those other factors. Audit reported and close out, step 9. A minor nonconformance is, this is more so around the nonconformances that can take place during the audit. Now, minor nonconformance is evidence of a random or infrequent failure to maintain compliance with a requirement that does not indicate a breakdown in the food safety management system. So, for example, a minor could be, you see one person without a beard net, and that's what an example of a minor nonconformance. A major nonconformance is a failure of a system element, a systematic breakdown in the food safety management system, or a serious deviation from the requirements, absence of evidence, or demonstrating compliance. So when you think of a major, it could be like you didn't conduct your internal audit. That's a major. That's a major nonconformance because that's a requirement of the code, and it didn't happen, so it's just not there. A critical nonconformance is a breakdown of a control or a critical control point, a prerequisite program, or other process steps, and judged likely to cause a significant public health risk or product contamination. So, and a critical is also an automatic failure of your SQF audit. So think along the lines of pest infestation around a product line, things of that nature, that would warrant a critical during your audit. Step 10, granting certification. The certification body makes the certification decision based on evidence of compliance and non-compliance recommended by the SQF auditor during the SQF audit. Your final report with completed and approved corrective actions is made available to the site before the final certification decision is made. And the certification on the system is awarded to sites that achieve a C rating or greater with no outstanding nonconformances. And your certification body makes the decision no more than 45 calendar days from the last day of the site audit. Okay, what to expect during your audit? Around 14 to 30 days prior to your audit, you should receive your audit plan from your auditor. And in that plan that's your schedule that should go to your primary contact for your audit. And that's to establish that contact. You can see the schedule and start a dialogue with the auditor if, possibly you need to move some things around on the schedule, or you need to share any PPEs that the site has so the auditor can be prepared for that audit and also the site. During the audit, you have your opening meeting. During your opening meeting, it'll be a recap of what are your food sector categories, covering the definitions of the nonconformances, maybe even tweaking the schedule. Maybe the maintenance person is going to be out and they're supposed to be covered on day 1. Maybe you need to move them to day 2, or things of that nature. That's kind of covered throughout the opening meeting. And during the audit, the auditor will be conducting employee reviews of your documentation and your facility. And as the auditor goes through your audit, they should also make you aware of issues that they're seeing. If they see something that may be a nonconformist, they should let you know right then and there. It shouldn't wait till the closing meeting. That's something that they should keep you up to date on throughout the whole audit. And at the end of the day, they should also give you a recap of the things they found, the nonconformances that they see, or maybe even if it's something that they need to, a loose end that they need to tie up the following day. They should let you know all that at that recap meeting at the end of day one. And as far as audit closing, at the final day of the audit, you have your closing meeting. The auditor should share some positives, some things that they saw in your program, and they should also share any nonconformances that were issued throughout the audit. Also, they should let you know that you have the right to appeal and what your next steps would be as far as the timelines for answering your nonconformances and how to get that information back to the certification body. And post-audit, the auditor has the right to report. They have to submit the report into the certification body for review. And then you should receive a draft report. And after that, you would start your process of answering your nonconformances and getting that information back to the certification body. And I kind of covered that, like the audit report should be provided to the site. Then your corrective action plan, technically the 30-day mark is when the auditor has to have those nonconformances approved. So typically we would like for the auditor to have, the site to have those nonconformances submitted to the auditor around day 21, because that gives us time that if there's things missing from your actual responses or more information is needed, it gives us time to go back and forth to make sure we get the information we need to close out those nonconformances. And like I said before, your certification decision takes place 45 days after the audit, and we have to have the certificate issued 55 days after the audit. And here's the scoring, the way the scoring is broken down. A minor is 1 point deducted from your score. A major is 5 points, and a critical is 50 points. And you can see the scale here, where if you score an 85 or below, between 85 and 70, you're required to have an additional audit, which would be a full system surveillance audit within 6 months. Now, if you score above 86 or above, you're fine, you're good until the next year, until your audit window starts again. And the way the audit window works is on your initial audit, say today was what's the last day of your audit, your anniversary date would be June 22nd. So your audit would take place 30 days plus or minus June 22nd every year. And as part of answering your nonconformances would be, you would need to submit a root cause corrective action and evidence, objective evidence that you've implemented that corrective action. And we have 30 days to complete those nonconformances, like I said, but you want to make sure you get those to us earlier, because submitting in that day 30 does not extend, if they're rejected at day 30, it does not extend the due date of your responses. And some of the tools you could use like the fishbone diagram, but my personal favorite is the 5Y. I like that one a lot better. And for recertification audits, once you have your audit, you next year, you should also be continually improving your system and your processes throughout the year. And then come next year, we'll start the whole process over, where we'll be conducting your audit at an agreed date, 30 days plus or minus. Like the example I use would be June 22nd. So when your audit has to take place. And the audit pretty much the same type of audit, scores calculated the same, nothing really changes there. So now there's a lot of good tools on the SQF website that you can use to get you started. You can use as reference. It's just a wealth of information out there. I strongly recommend that you go out there and you look on the website and start looking at some of that information. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan. Next, we'll hear from Tammy Van Buren on the first and very important step of developing your food safety plan, and that is the risk assessment. Tammy is the SQF compliance manager and is an expert in food safety and quality management from her many years experience in the food industry prior to joining SQFI. As an SQF certified site, you can be confident in the integrity of the certification process and the standards due to Tammy's close attention to all matters of compliance. We look forward to hearing Tammy's presentation about developing a risk assessment. Thanks, Tammy. Over to you.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm not seeing myself yet, but hopefully you all can see me and hear me. But today I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to talk about hazard analysis, risk assessment. You will hear both of those terms in our code, and it can be confusing. I know, getting started, it can be really confusing when you're looking at hazard and risk. So I'm going to start out by saying what is a hazard versus what is a risk. So a hazard is a factor that creates an undesirable effect. So it's something that's going to be present that could have an adverse health effect on the consumer or the potential to. So many times we think hazards, you should be thinking biological, chemical, or physical hazards. So within the code, you're required to do a hazard analysis. That will be part of your food safety plan. And how does that differ from a risk assessment? Well, your risk is going to be figured in your hazard analysis. So you're going to have to look at risk as a part of your hazard analysis. So risk, you can see there, is defined as the probability that those hazards that you identified are going to occur. So you have to take into consideration two things: likelihood and the severity posed by the hazard. So a hazard has the potential to cause harm. Risk is the likelihood of that harm occurring and based on exposure to that hazard. Hopefully that cleared a few things up between hazard and risk, but I'm going to focus on risk assessment. And how do we do that? How do we get started? Okay, so what is a risk assessment? We do define that. It's the identification, evaluation, and determination and an estimation of the levels of risk in a process to determine an appropriate control method. So that's how we define it. But what does that really mean, right? So it is a requirement within our code that the practitioner or somebody else that gets delegated performs a structured approach. And what we mean by structured is there is a process to a risk assessment. There are things that you need to have present in order for it to be a valid risk assessment. And so we're going to break that down and talk about that today. I did forget to mention, please use the chat. So far, our chat's been a little bit quiet, but please use the chat. Feel free to do that. Ask your questions. We'll either get to them during the presentation or possibly in the breakout rooms, but definitely when we come back to the end after our breakout rooms are over, we will try to get to all of your questions. So get those fingers typing and get those questions in because I know there's got to be questions. So please feel free to do that. But we're going to look at all the different parts of a risk assessment today. And, and as it says, risk assessments are the backbone to any functioning food safety system. So without those risk assessments, it's really hard to have a good, sound food safety system. So what does that all mean? I saw slides are advancing just a little bit slow. There we go. So one part that you have to make sure that you have to have in your risk assessment, and you really need to identify this prior to getting started. Okay, so I've got an example of a risk matrix on the screen there. You can see that the likelihood is horizontally across the bottom. Severity is vertical. Does it have to be that way? Absolutely not. You could switch those up. Likelihood could be vertical, severity could be horizontal. You know, you pick what works for you. But you have to define some of those things. So for likelihood, this one's a 3 by 3. So unlikely that something will happen, possible that it would happen, likely that it would happen. And then the severity is defined as mild. Oh, we got a typo on that screen too. It's not milk, it's mild. So make sure you don't put milk in your risk matrix. Moderate and then severe. Okay. And then for each one of those combinations, you have a grid that creates this low risk, medium risk, high risk combination. So when you're looking at severity, please always remember you're looking at the highest level of damage possible. And then with likelihood, it's the possibility of it occurring. So you should have some type of data that goes along with it. So it's just not a guess. And that's why we have to have that structured approach, because we just can't guess at what the severity is. We can't just guess at how likely it should occur. There's got to be some data behind it and some forethought. Okay. So I'm looking at the chat now. Good job. You guys are getting some questions in. So do you have a sample risk assessment template that can be shared? So Lori, there are lots of sample risk assessments. And, you know, one thing I like to use Google. You know, sometimes you have to be weary of what you find on the internet. But one of the things that I find is that, oh, yeah, my screen's kind of going crazy here. Let me get, okay. So I just did a quick Google search today for the risk matrix, and I literally got hundreds of different examples and templates for the risk matrix itself. You can also do that for a risk assessment. You can Google that and there will be lots of templates that will come up. So, you know, pick the one that works best for you. I mean, for the risk matrix, you can see here, there's some 3 by 3s, there's some 5 by 5s. I think there's one that's a 4 by 4. You know, I've seen people get really elaborate and do like a 10 by 10, you know, but one thing that's in common with all of these, you'll see those bright colors. So they color code everything so it's easy to identify what's low risk. So you may put green as low risk. You may put yellow as that medium or middle risk, moderate risk. And then those high risk would be red or orange, something that just indicates that it's very, very severe. I think one of them even uses black for severity. So that could be something that maybe could cause death. Maybe they associate that black color with something that's so severe that it comes in with a black color on it. Okay, so use Google. I strongly suggest that you do that because there's some great information out there, some great templates out there. And why recreate the wheel if you can borrow something from somebody else? Okay, so save yourself some time. You can certainly create something from scratch, but I'm a big supporter of borrowing what other people have already done. So let's dig a little bit deeper into severity before we move on. What would happen if contaminated food is ingested? So you're looking at the severity. So could somebody get sick? Would somebody get sick to the point that they needed to be seen by a doctor or they needed to be medicated? Would it be sick enough that they might have to be hospitalized? Or, as I mentioned previously, is there a possibility that it could be so severe that it causes death? And then not only are you considering that, but you're considering all the different vulnerable groups. So maybe an adult who has a pretty good immune system might not even get sick at all if introduced to the hazard, whereas a small child or the elderly or someone who's immunocompromised might be significantly impacted by it. So again, when you're looking at severity, you want to look at the most severe reaction, and that's across all of the vulnerable groups. So remember to keep that in mind when you're looking at severity. Likelihood, how likely is it to occur? How easily can it occur? You know, and if you don't have specific history with that type of issue, there's data out there. How many recalls occur annually because of mislabeling or unidentified allergens? What is the history in your facility or maybe some similar facilities? Maybe you have some sister facilities that you could take a look at that has history with that. Or when you're looking at supplier issues, you know, what's the likelihood that a specific supplier will have an issue? So you could get some history with some of your suppliers, and that would help you to identify that likelihood. I'm going to take a quick look at the chat because I've seen some questions come in. So let's see. How does the SQF serve a kitchen within a shared kitchen space? Okay, so we'll save that question to the end. That's kind of more of a general. What drives the timing for the audits? So Julie, if you could expand on that a little bit. So if you're talking initial audit, you know, that's an agreement between you and your certification body. But Ryan did address the recertification audits previously. Okay. Let's see.
Yep. And Tammy, there were a couple of other kind of time mentions around like 50 days or 60 days. I didn't quite catch what that timing was related to.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so that's all post-audit activities. So once you agree to the audit date with the CB, then all of those, that 10 days was the amount of time it takes for the CB to get your final audit report to you, is that 10 days. And then you have your 30 days to get your corrective actions in, and the CB closes those out. Then the CB has another couple of weeks to make a cert decision, and then another 10 days to issue your certificate. So that's all post-audit dates. So hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah, thank you. And those are all standard processes, standard timing that,
standard time
that
frames.
manufacturers can depend on.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Super, thank you.
You're very welcome. Some of these we're going to save to the end because they're more general. I'm just looking through to see if there's any specific to risk. Okay, not seeing any more risk questions. So I'm going to go on, and then we will get those risk questions, try to answer them as I go. All right, so the one thing I want you to do through this all is apply a risk mindset. So here at SQF, we get lots of questions, lots of technical questions. We, put a few of them on the screen here. Where do I find the requirements for ink pens? I came from manufacturing. I worked in several food facilities. And when I was first in the food industry, everybody's like, oh, you can't have lidded pens out on the manufacturing floor, or lidded markers. You can only have the click style. And then once I read the SQF code, nowhere in there does it say you have to have a click style pen. So where did that come up from? Where did we get that requirement? Well, you have to look at, sometimes they're regulatory requirements, but sometimes they're just things that have been passed down where people found risk in having lidded ink pens and lidded markers in the production area. So those pieces that could become detached and that could find their way into the product flow. So somewhere along the way, somebody did a risk assessment and said, we can't have lidded pens out on our production floor. They can only be the click style. So then that becomes common practice or best practice. But what it did was involve somebody applying a risk mindset somewhere along the way and figuring out that, that's what you have to have. Okay, so there's some examples there. Piercings, we get that question a lot. You know, what about tongue piercings and nose piercings and earrings? And, you know, how do those fall? Belly ring, I get that question. What if people have belly rings, you know? So again, it comes down to risk. What is the risk to the employee wearing those piercings out in the production area? So how do you apply that risk mindset? So there's a process, you know, define what you want to evaluate, identify and assess the hazard. So what is the hazard to wearing piercings out in the production area? So that would be a physical hazard. That would be foreign material that could get in your product. So that's your hazard. So then you need to look at the likelihood and the severity if it happens. So what is the severity if somebody gets, you know, a large piece of an earring that's, you know, found in their product? So that's pretty severe. If somebody, it's a choking hazard for small children. So that can be pretty severe. But what's the likelihood that it's going to happen? Well, the likelihood that something that's exposed on the, you know, nose or the ear would be more likely to occur maybe than something that's below the waist, that's hidden by a shirt. So it's all about risk. Okay, so get that risk mindset. So you may need to get control of it, implement mitigating measures, and then you want to document it because we're going to do a breakout room in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about what's the auditor looking for when they're looking at your risk assessments. Okay, and that's one of the things they're going to look for is a document where you identified what the likelihood was of occurrence, what the severity was of the issue or the hazard, but so you have to have it documented. And then you have to have a conclusion. So what am I going to do? Am I going to control it? Am I not going to allow lidded pins out on the manufacturing floor because it's too big of a risk? So take a look at that, document it, and check that it's working as intended. So you want to go back and review and close out that loop. All right, so risk assessment within the code. You know, we have a lot of mandatory elements. Ryan touched on those. Those are all in module 2 or our system elements. So what about when you get to module 11, if you're doing food manufacturing or some of those other GMP or GAP elements, GDP if you're in storage and distribution, you know, those are risk-based. Okay, and so within module 2, we say that the site shall make sure that the GMPs, in this example, it's talking module 11, so it's food manufacturing, are documented and implemented or exempted according to a written risk analysis. So you have to have justification for why you need exemption or evidence of what alternative control measures that you're going to have in place. But again, it comes down to making sure that, you know, the food is still safe and it's not compromised. Okay. So again, the risk analysis must be documented. And that's one of the things that the auditor will look for. So always keep in mind, SQF is a risk-based approach. And that's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites. It is, well, it's actually my favorite certification program, is because it is risk-based. And that's the approach we take on so many different aspects of the code. So just keep that in mind. So I want to give you all a few key takeaways from today. From my part of the presentation, you know, build your own risk assessment process. So again, use Google, find that risk assessment template. You can find also templates for HACCP plans or preventive control plans, a combined plan, so you don't have to have two if you're both FDA and SQF. So there's all kinds of templates. Within that template, though, you're going to be doing risk assessments. Okay, so that's going to be built into those templates, but you also may need a risk assessment template just for, you know, other things that come up within your food safety system that you need to do a risk assessment on. So again, lots of templates available on the internet. Check those out. Identifying your risk matrix, the one that works for you. Again, I got hundreds of different risk matrices that popped up when I just did a quick Google search. Use data to identify the severity and likelihood. You know, it's very easy to say, well, I think that it's probably not very severe, or I think it's probably not likely, but the more data you have to support that, the easier it will be to convince your auditor when he's looking at your risk assessment that you applied scientific information or data to your risk assessment. Document and review. So that is a requirement, making sure those are documented, and change the mindset to be risk-based. Once you get everyone in your facility thinking in that risk-based approach, they'll think about it as a part of the culture. You know, we want to do something different. What's the risk? You know, we want them to think in terms of that. So we have a real treat for you today. We've got a couple of companies that are going to come talk to us about their specific experiences in food safety. And so they're going to share. I believe Daniel Mora is going to come up first. And you can see Daniel pictured there. His company is Mad Mexican. And so he's going to share his story. And then after that, I believe Tiffany Neal is going to join us, and she's going to talk about what she's got going on at Barlow's. And so go ahead and take it away.
Tammy, hi everyone, how are you? I'm trying to get control of the presentation, but I can't. I don't know if Carey can help
One
me.
moment. Yep, one moment. I'm going to hand it over to you here.
Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know why it's not letting me do that. I'll just advance your slides for you. How's that sound?
Perfect. That
Okay.
sounds great.
Okay,
All
great.
right, we can go to the next one. Okay, my name is Daniel. I've been working at Mad Mexican for approximately 4 years, and I was hired here at this company for a major goal, which was to certify the production floor and the products under the SQF standard. We produce Mexican sauces, like the ones that you can see in the screen. We produce chunky guacamole, which is really, really good. And other Mexican sauces like the salsa morita and the roasted tomatillo. We also make chips from scratch, from white corn and blue corn. And we also make corn tortillas and flour tortillas. Everything is from scratch. You can go to the next slide, please. When I came to this company and I saw the challenge that we had in the implementation and the certification of the standard, I like to think in the process in two big areas. The big area, and actually Ryan commented that in his presentation, actually he'd say step 4 for the documentation and step 5 for the implementation. So it caught my attention that I brought basically a similar information. For me, the implementation process is two big different areas. The first one is everything related with the documentation, which is complicated, but it's simple because it's something that you have to do by yourself, right? You have to sit in the computer and create everything, research all the information, collect all the information in which you are going to support your HACCP plan and your prerequisites. But also the second step, the implementation on the floor, for me is a little bit more complicated, because it's when you go to the floor, to the production floor, and it's when you are going to face the resistance to change from the people. Sometimes people, they are going to resist, right? To start taking some controls or changing the way they are doing their jobs. And that is a little bit complicated. So for me, the documentation part, even though it's a lot of work, is a little bit easier than the implementation on the floor, which is the step in which, from my perspective, you need to pay more attention. We can go to the next slide. So when I started the implementation here, I'm at Mexican, and when Carey invited me to this webinar, I was thinking in the big challenges that I had at that moment 4 years ago. So for me, I want to share with you 3 of these big challenges. One of them is related with the records. The second one, I call it for this presentation, expert in everything. I'm going to explain you in a bit what is it about. And the last one is going to be get involved. So we can go to the next slide. Regarding everything with the records. For me, there is things that can be, you can be a little bit flexible when you are implementing a food standard, but there are some things that are not negotiable, right? One of these things, from my perspective, are the records, because the records is something that the auditor is going to come and check. One part of the auditor job during the audit is going to be checking all your records, right? So if your records are perfect, if your records are impeccable, which is what I like from a quality or food safety management system, the audit is gonna be simple. It's gonna be easy for you. It's gonna be easy for you also to avoid to have mistakes in the records if you pay attention to them. If you know, for example, in these examples that I have on the screen, if you have a cooler room and you know that the temperature of the cooler room has to be in between a range, right? And you take the time to verify and to check the records in a daily basis or in a weekly basis, and you make sure that the record, all the data that is in the record is within the limits and there is no deviations, or if there is deviations, you are taking actions over those deviations to put the process back on tracks. You are gonna be on the safe side on the audit, right? Once the auditor is gonna be checking your records, everything is gonna be really simple. If you are completely sure about the information that is there. So when I came to Mad Mexican, I was checking the records that they had, and the problem was that they had a lot of mistakes and a lot of scratches, and there were a number 4 that was looking like a number 9, but it was a number 7, and that type of mistakes in our records are not acceptable. So one of the first things that or the first rule that I put in place was no mistake in records. So for the first few days, people, I was rejecting a lot of, a big quantity or a big portion of the records that I was receiving for all the mistakes that people were having. But after a few days, people understood the importance of having proper records, of having impeccable records. And after that, and I am really proud of that, all the records looks like the ones that you can see here on the screen. So my goal is always to make the job of the auditor as easy as possible. And if you have records like this, you are gonna be sure that you're gonna have a really good result in the audit. Also, remember that you can have mistakes in the records. Maybe you wrote down a number and then you realize that that number was different. But it's always important that you have to have a way to present or to correct those mistakes in a way that is not going to show any scratch or something like that. If you can see the cleaning and sanitation record that is on your right side, on the lower part, on the comments, there is a correction for a mistake that this person made in this record. So you have to have clear that is that you are going to have mistakes, because we are humans and we are going to have mistakes. So the records are not going to be perfect, but you have to have your ways to present those mistakes in a proper way. Let me check a little bit the chat. I think that question is not for me. All right, we can move to the next slide. The second challenge that I had when I was implementing the SQF standard, my background is food science. I went to university for food science. So when I came here, we are a small company, and we didn't have a maintenance engineer to explain me how a machine works, or to explain me how the calibration process is. So the big challenge that I had was that I had to start learning about how to create a preventive maintenance, even though I am not a maintenance engineer, or how to create the calibration program. So at this point, it was really useful for me, my creativity. It was really interesting how I create the preventive maintenance program, even though I am not an expert in that area. And we have been using the same program since 4 years ago. We went through 4 different audits. We are still using the same maintenance program, and it's really good, actually. So when you don't understand, or when you are not as expert in a topic, just put your imagination and your creativity to work, and I'm pretty sure that you're going to be able to create something that is going to be useful for you. Because the idea is that you have to imagine the result that you want, right? In this case, with a preventive maintenance program, what I want is machines working perfect, and machines not giving me any risk of any hazard, right? That's what I'm looking for. So if you have in mind the goal that you want to have with your program, it's gonna be easy for you to design the different paths that you need to follow in order for you to get that result. So even though I am not an expert in machines and in calibration, I was able to create those programs. So with this, I just want to tell you that don't worry about these type of programs that maybe you are not understanding in the beginning. Just have in mind the goals, what you are looking for with your program, and that is going to help you to have a really good program, a really good designed program. We can go to the next slide. And the last one is an invitation for you if you are implementing any food standard like SQF. My recommendation is go to the floor. Sometimes I met some people implementing programs, doing all the work from their computers, and it doesn't work like that. You really need to go to the production floor. You need to know, you need to get to know the problems that you have in order for you to improve them. You need to get to know your process. You need to be an expert in your process. You need to know your process from the beginning to the end. In that way, you are going to be able to create the whole program, and you're going to be able to put the food safety system to work for you. Because the idea is not to have the SQF certification only because it's a nice certificate. The idea is to have the certification because it is going to help you to have less stress, right? You are going to be sure the risk of the hazards in the products are going to be reduced or are going to be eliminated. So this is going to help you to work a little bit more easier at your plant. And also, if you are going to be working at the production floor, you are going to see what your people need to be trained on. You are going to see, okay, people is The people need now more training on good manufacturing practices, or people maybe is not understanding properly the traceability process. So you're gonna be able to know in first hand what are your training needs. So you're gonna be able to train your team in a proper way. So this is my participation at this moment, and I'm gonna pass the microphone to Tiffany.
Thank you, Daniel, and hello, everyone. So how many of emerging brands do we have out there, right? So you have this wonderful recipe, it was passed down, or a delicious recipe, and you just had this wonderful idea that you were going to take that recipe from your kitchen and you were going to go directly to stores and you were going to sell out, right? And our lives were going to be made. So I raised my hand because that's kind of what I thought initially. So my name is Tiffany Neal, and I am the founder and CEO of Barlow's Foods. Can I get the slide to go to the next screen, please? We create a 3-in-1 biscuit, pancake, and waffle mix in Atlanta made from better for you ingredients. And I started this company out of my home kitchen, like a lot of entrepreneurs, right? So you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what needs to be in place. I just knew that I wanted to take my grandfather's legacy of farming and agriculture and get that in the mouths of everyone. But boy, have I had my work really cut out for me. Since launching out of my home, we started with a cottage foods license, and then we went to farmers markets. Was kind of our trajectory. From farmers markets, we've moved to local grocery stores, and we have moved to gift boxes and premium platforms such as Foxbox and Uncommon Goods. We successfully launched QVC last year. But I want to talk a little bit of what that looks like, right? How do you even get there? Next slide. So it sounds great, right? You get these opportunities and we can all cold call, we can build great relationships, and we can get on a shelf, we can get an opportunity. But how do you stay there, right? So how do you get from up top? That was literally me in my kitchen. Bottom left was me in my first commercial kitchen space or shared kitchen space to the shelf. How do you get there and how do you stay there? Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about just tips and tricks, right? On what you can do now if you're starting as an emerging brand or you're in the infancy stages. It always starts with the idea, right? I say know where you want to be in relation to where you are and then work your way towards that. Because a lot of times it can be overwhelming dealing with all of the different regulations, certifications, and the criteria that you need to meet in order to get your food product out there and be safely consumable. I saw several of y'all that chimed in stating that you were in a commercial or a shared kitchen space. So I would like to just really start there and to say, to really understand where you are, what your idea is, and where you envision yourself, because that's going to determine what you need to put in place at what time. So for example, when we got the opportunity of QVC is going to vet you, right? They want you to have safety plans in place. They want you to have so many things and so many boxes checked. So it's just really important to know where you are now and where you want to be. Where do you see your products sold? Because plenty of retailers are going to want to see a HACCP. They're going to want to see SQF. They're going to want to see different plans and measures in place before they'll even review your product. So I say always start with the end in mind. And then record keeping is extremely important, as Daniel and Tammy both spoke about. Being an emerging brand or being on a smaller scale, I think that sometimes we think that we are not large enough, right, to take all of these major manufacturing steps, when I say that that is not true. And that's probably the best time to really start to implement these things into your brand, into your company culture and structure. Because once things get really busy or as things grow, Daniel mentioned, once you have employees that you have to break the habits of, it's very difficult, right, to crack the whip when you have 100 people now operating, potentially doing, taking incorrect measures or taking their own route. So something that's been really beneficial for us is just to start early. When I was in the kitchen by myself, I was, I had on all my equipment. I had my safety measures in place, always recording, always, making sure that lot codes were recorded, that lot codes were assigned, that dates were being recorded accurately. So you're never too small to get started. And it's just easier to maintain and to build that into who you are as a company, your company culture. So that's just easier to communicate and onboard as your team starts to grow. And then the last thing is just to get help, right? So there are tons of experts on this call, but also what's been really helpful for us is going through our local university. Again, I'm in Georgia, so University of Georgia has been very helpful. You can always start there, right? Don't think that you have to just eat the whole elephant at one time, right? Just find your local resources and again, figure out where you're looking to go and start to reach out to those universities, other businesses to start to understand what is even needed to get a plan in place so that you are operating, correctly and you're operating at your customer's best interest. You really want to identify like what are potential risks. That's something when we were going through our HACCP plan, you want to be granular with everything. Things as simple as Tammy mentioned, wearing accessories. We don't allow things like that when we're in production. Things that we may not consider, to be a huge deal. You want to just look at every single protocol and every step of what you're doing so that you can account for that and you can see if there are any risks associated with any of those steps in your processes. When we were starting out again as a solopreneur initially, I just knew I would go into work, I would go into manufacturing, I knew what needed to be done, I knew what the recipe was, I knew the protocol. You still need to account for all of those things outside of your head, outside of your routine, so that you can see where in any of those steps there's a chance for error. I do want to speak on a specific instance where we went into a co-pack or a co-manufacturing relationship last year. And I think that sometimes, when you get at capacity and you need assistance, right? Maybe it's for a specific order or you're just looking to outsource some of your business. At least I, at the time, thought, getting a co-packer, a little bit of weight off of my shoulder, they're going to have it, we're going to be all right. And that is one of the furthest things from the truth. So that's something that I want to talk about as well, is that you're still accountable when you get those third-party folks involved. And you have to make sure that not only do you have your checks and balances in place, but that they also have regulatory rules and documentation in place so that you're not, putting yourself in harm's way. Because at the end of the day, if you don't cross your T's and dot your I's, you're still going to be accountable as the brand, as the owner or the manager of your firm. Next slide. I'm more than happy to talk with any of you, especially more on like the infancy stages, if you're in that space, and answer any questions that you may have. I'm happy to offer myself as a resource, and you can find me at tiffany@barlowsfoods.com. You can also find me on social, across all social platforms at Barlow's Foods. And congratulations on everyone's success on this crazy, crazy food journey. And I would love to be a resource if possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. It is so interesting to hear about your challenges. It's inspiring to hear about your successes and starting up your new businesses and your programs. And I know it's a lot of hard work. And I know a lot of people on this call who are in the infancy stages are going through a lot of hard work to get ready for expansion. So it's just very much worth it. We are now ready to move into the breakout session portion of our event, but I did want to check the chat really quick and see if there's a few questions that we can answer prior to going into the breakouts. Let's see here. All right, there's a few questions just to kind of about audit process. Yes, we'll get the slides afterwards. We'll get a copy of this out to you. There's a question about how much does a typical audit cost, the auditor fees. So it was mentioned earlier on about the SQF registration fee, which is an upfront cost when you register your site, but then you go to your certification body and they issue you a quote for services. And maybe Ryan wants to speak to kind of the average price depending on the average duration of an audit. Ryan, what would you like to say about that?
Well, I guess it's depending on a lot of factors when it comes to, I guess it's kind of hard without giving you an actual quote for your site, because it's kind of, tailor-made for you, because there could be certain things or certain issues, like when I mentioned in my presentation about employee count is a factor, the size of your facility, and also the complexity. It can be other things that you're involved in, or it could be multiple food sector categories that you have that may cause your audit time to be, your audit quote to be different. So it's kind of hard to explain. It's more so that you probably should reach out to us if you want a quote, and we can get all those details and get you an accurate and good quote.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes, it has a lot of variables involved for sure. So it's best to speak with somebody about your specific situation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a question here that I'm curious to hear from Tammy about, if she has some insight. How does SQF certification apply to a kitchen with a shared kitchen space? For example, like Tiffany's situation in a shared area. Is SQF certification possible in a shared space where not all the products are looking to achieve certification that are being made in that shared space?
Yeah, I can weigh in on that. So kind of as Ryan indicated, it depends. So the certification body is a real good resource for you. They will ask you lots of questions about that shared space and how much of it is shared versus how much is dedicated to your specific company. And they will kind of dive into that and determine how they can best audit your facility and how the code could best be applied. So as I mentioned in the risk assessment phase, or needing a risk assessment for exemptions, you could also apply a risk assessment to exempt certain parts of the building, certain products that you're not requiring certification for, but definitely your certification body. I always tell people, sooner rather than later, you should identify that certification body, and they will help to determine exactly how we can best serve you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like it would be variable depending on if there's many people producing at the same different time from different companies, or if it's only you during your designated time. Those risks are going to be different. So that CB would need to understand all that detail.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Company making plastic bags to sell food, bread bags. What level of certification do we need? If I'm not mistaken, bread bags would fall into the manufacturing of packaging materials. And so you would want to download that packaging manufacturing code from the SQF website and talk with your certification body about achieving certification to that specific code. All right. A question from Julie about what point in the early stage brand's growth should we start the steps of certification process? What are the considerations, or is there a checklist of early stage brands who are working with a kitchen or setting up their own manufacturing facility? I would recommend starting out with just downloading the code again and getting familiar with it, and also looking into what I mentioned earlier was the SQF fundamentals program. It is a great way to start looking at the fundamentals basic or fundamentals intermediate. If you can meet both of those sets of requirements as you're getting into your production, you know where your production space is going to be and what your environment is, and how sophisticated your team is in terms of setting up policies and procedures, it's going to determine what level you're ready to go to. So I recommend checking out the fundamentals program, but also the benchmarked SQF food safety code, and understanding, like Tiffany said, having the end in mind. Do you want to go to a national retailer like first If that's the case, you're most likely going to need a fully benchmarked SQF certification, and maybe seeking a co-manufacturer who has that and can add your product to their scope would be a good thing to do. So there's lots of different ways to approach it, and kind of depends on your situation. If you're going to have your own space, or if you're intending to go up to a co-packer. But I definitely would recommend going to the site and starting out with, there's so much guidance on the SQF website, lots of tip sheets, lots of guidance on what the codes mean. So it's really helpful just to become familiar with those. There's a question about what category an auditor would need for a producer of tortilla salsa and repackaged product for sale. Tammy, do you have off the top of your head the food sector categories that auditor would need to have for tortilla salsa? That's a couple different ones. And repacking.
Yeah, so tortillas, I'm gonna assume you're baking probably. So it may be 13 for tortillas. Salsa, probably 18. That would be preserved foods. So I'm assuming that would fall under that category. Although fresh salsa might be something different. So it again, to use our specific phrases, it might be, it depends. Because if it's fresh salsa, it could be 14, where you're just having a very short shelf life, and there's really no preservatives going in there. And then repackaging product for sale, typically that's 25, but it again depends on what skill set the auditor needs to be able to audit that part of the process. So if it's something where you're taking something that's packaged and you're just putting it in a different container, maybe creating something like a mixed bag of something, or a mixed like a cheese and meat tray, things like that, that would be different than if you're getting in something and you're repackaging and it's going through a lot of equipment. So again, your CB would be able to determine exactly what it is, but those are just a few off the top of my head. So, and all of those would fall under the food manufacturing code.
Yeah.
So regardless of which category it is, those would all fall under food manufacturing.
Great. Really interesting question from Solomon about an opportunity to partner with SQF on building capacity for subject matter experts in the supply chain in a company, or a country such as Nigeria. We know that there's a lot of activity going on in capacity building. We'd really be happy to speak with you about that. So please reach out to us after the event and we can have a conversation. There's lots of resources available through SQF to help with that. Okay. All right. There's a question about shared kitchens. I think we've talked about that, and we can address that more in more detail after the call with you specifically. Okay. Novel food that does not fall under the current codes. What would be the process around a novel food that does not fall under the current codes? Well, I think that would be a great discussion to have with Tammy or your certification body to evaluate truly what is that product, what are the processes and the risks. Could it fit in somewhere that doesn't necessarily specifically say that product, or is it really something totally new? So it depends. So let's have a conversation. All right, it looks like we're got through the questions so far. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen, but I wanted to just quickly say, so if you want to join the conversation with Tiffany and Ryan about internal audits and assessing the readiness of your program, you're going to go to the bottom of your screen. I will stop sharing and you'll see the breakout room button at the bottom of your screen. You will click that and join that room. And if you want to join the conversation with Tammy and Daniel about the mind of the auditor and the risk assessment, you'll just stay here. You don't need to click anything. And we'll get started on that in a few minutes, just as soon as everybody's moved to their respective corners. And then we'll all come back here at about around 2:50 to regroup. And if there's more questions that we can answer in the main room, we'll do all that together before we say goodbye. So if you're ready to go, move into the breakout room. If you're moving out to that conversation, go ahead and do that. And we'll see you back here shortly after the breakout. And raise your hand if you're having any trouble with joining the breakout room. And Ryan, please do the recording in there. Okay, Tammy and Daniel, if you want to go ahead and initiate your discussion, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. So again, please utilize the chat if you have any questions about risk assessments, or even, in general about the code. I'll be glad to help answer your questions. Please feel free to reach out. The one thing I just wanted to start off with saying about risk assessments is we've mentioned our resources that we have available through sqfi.com. And so you can go to our website. There's a resource page. There is a guidance document on risk assessments. So you can check that out. At the end, we always put the road to Rio, which is the way we train our auditors to audit our code. And that's 3 different ways of collecting evidence. And so records, interviews, and observations. And that will tell you kind of what the auditor's looking for. But as far as risk assessments goes, they're going to be looking for that key component, those key components that we talked about already. They're going to look to see that that you have your risk matrix, that you have a process, that it's documented, how you're doing that risk assessment, that you're looking at likelihood and severity, and that you're meeting each part of the code where you need to have a risk assessment required. So Daniel, I don't know, we talked earlier, did you have anything specific that you wanted to add as far as risk assessments go, and anything they need to keep in mind? Or you've got several, I'm sure, that you've done for your certification, and what are some tips and techniques you can give them?
Well, actually, following your explanation about how a risk assessment it has to be done, I learned a lot, even though I've done a few during my certification process here at the plant. For me, one of the most important things, like I mentioned before, is that you need to know your process, right? You need to know where your big risks are. For example, you need to know which is the last step of your process in which the food is in contact with a machine or with another surface that is not the packaging material. So in that way, you're going to be able to evaluate the severity or the occurrence of the risks that you have, right? If you have a process, a product that is filled by pistons, and just after the pistons, it comes the packaging material. Well, those pistons are going to be in the top of the risk, of the possible risk, right? Because it's the final touching of your product with something that is not the packaging material. So you have to have in mind those steps of the process, but also, of course, all the documentation and science, big bibliography that you can find in order to have a good result. But my advice is gonna be that get to know your process and get to know the last step of your process in which the product is going to be in contact with any machine, with any other surface that is not the packaging material. And most likely that surface is gonna be in high risk, or is a surface that you need to evaluate like a high risk.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions? I know I had indicated definitely use something that's already out there. Don't try to recreate anything, because there are lots of great templates out there. Get one that is easy to use. Identify your template, identify your risk matrix. Again, go simple. If people think sometimes we've got to go really fancy and we have to dazzle the auditor, and it's really not that way. So I showed the one on the screen that was a 3x3, and starting out that might be might work for you. So just go simple. But again, looking at the highest severity and, considering all those different groups of stakeholders in that analysis, and then, determining what's the likelihood. So anybody have anything to comment on or add to that? I don't mind you unmuting yourself if you want to ask a question, or type it in the chat if you're not comfortable doing that. Yes. Go ahead.
Maybe if you let me know, or you remind me how many risk assessments do I have to implement for the SQF standard, so I can have in my mind clear how many risk assessments I have to implement in my process.
Okay, well, how about if I share my screen, and that has the, I've got the guidance document up there. So let me bring it down so I don't look like I'm looking up. Okay, so let me do that. My screen there. This is our, oh. Okay, for some reason can you all, Daniel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, for some reason I'm getting a message that Zoom has quit. So keep thinking it's trying to kick me out. So yeah, so there is our risk assessment guidance document. And you can see there where it mentions specifically the applicable code requirements in the food manufacturing code, where risk assessments are mentioned. So you could look those up, 11111. I have my code. I always have it handy here. So I can tell you. So we've got premises, location, and approval. So that's where you have to look at your areas around your facility. So what's some of the risk that would, you're not seeing, oh, you're not seeing my, I just got the message that you're not seeing my correct screen. So let me try that again. Let's see. That happens sometimes. Oh, here we go. Let's just share the document and see if that will work. Now, hopefully you're seeing the guidance document.
It says that you started the screen sharing.
Okay, it's continuing to kick me out of Zoom. So let me try one more time and see if it will let me share. Okay. Maybe. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, for some reason, Zoom's not liking me today. So it's not wanting me to share. So our guidance documents are available. For edition 9, we made them topical. We do have some tip sheets as well that are specific to fundamentals. But even if you're going fundamentals, those guidance documents would, the code references would be different, but the guidance documents really have some great information in them. So you can see here, 11111, that's your premises and your facility location. So you need to determine, is there risk around you? I worked at a bakery, and I will tell you, we had a Walmart directly across the street. We had a farm directly behind us. We had a facility right next to us that dealt with anhydrous ammonia, which is used by farmers to fertilize the ground. And that was something that, when we first analyzed our location, we were like, yeah, no, there's nothing around us. That's why I say, use data and really put some thought into it. But we didn't think there was a risk there to any of the facilities around us until I was driving to work one day. And I see this cloud, this mushroom cloud, as I'm driving closer to my plant, and the fire trucks are going by, and I'm thinking, oh no, our building's on fire. That was my first thought. But I got close enough to the building and realized it had an anhydrous leak next door. And I go running in the building, shut off the ventilation, close the vents, stop production, because we had not really considered that. We did not have that as a part of our risk assessment, because who would have thought that, somebody, your next door neighbor, was going to have a leak? But we should have really analyzed their process and determined, that could happen. And somebody had left a valve open, and anhydrous had filled the air, and anhydrous gives you, it settles, and it's like a low fog. And so we had to shut the building, up, close all access doors and vents and things so that it didn't come in to the building. And we were shut down for several hours. But you have to, so that's the first place in module 11 where it talks about risk, and you need to consider that. 11.1.2 is building materials, 0.5 and 0.6. 0.5 is about ducting, conduit, and pipes. So you have to do a risk analysis to make sure, because a lot of your ducting, your conduit pipes are going to be running overhead in your facility. So you have to do a risk assessment to determine, what if there's a leak? Or condensation dripping. So is there a risk there to food safety? And food contamination, you have to make sure you mitigate those. 11.1.2.6 is about sanitary pipes, or pipes carrying sanitary waste. Again, those may be overhead, so you need to consider the risk there to that. Then you've got the next one is 11.3.3.1. So let me flip over there. 11.3.3.1. We've got personnel welfare. And so that is where you get into people coming to work sick. So I'm sorry, no, I'm on the wrong one. 11.3.3.1 is clothing and personal effects. So you have to do a risk analysis for your uniforms and the clothing that people wear to work. So what risk is it? The clothing, the hair policy, beard nets, all those things need to be part of your contamination. And one thing that I mentioned to a lot of people was during COVID. What did we add during COVID? Face mask. Did you add that to your risk assessment? If not, you should have. So because, became part of your uniform. So people, did you allow people to wear face masks that they brought to work with them? What did they do in that face mask before they got to work? Where did they wear it? Was there possible micro contamination or physical contamination? What are they going to do with that when they go to the bathroom, when they go to break and they're eating their lunch? Where's their face mask? Is there an allergen risk? Something that they could have gotten in the break room eating a peanut butter sandwich and contaminate their mask. So a lot of things, a lot of sites didn't add that. So that should have been added to their risk assessment. And then you got 11.3.3.8, that's the jewelry. We talked about that earlier. Where can you allow that? We say within the code, you could accept, medical alert bracelets, medical alert jewelry, or jewelry for religious reasons, plain wedding bands, that's listed in there. But you also have to consider, a lot of people are piercing the part of their ear for medical purposes. Doctors prescribe that to alleviate migraines. So we had people that ask us if they could get a waiver for jewelry because it really was medically necessary. So you have to assess whether that's going to create a hazard. And then the last reference there is 11615. 11615 is overflow storage areas. So do you ever run out of room in your receiving warehouse and you have to store ingredients somewhere that you don't normally store them? Or maybe it's not specifically designed for food storage. Maybe you need to rent a warehouse down the road as your company's growing, and maybe you outgrow your building. And so you need some overflow storage. So you have to do that, to do one there as well. So those are the specific places where it mentions it. But then I talked about things earlier like ink pens. You may need to do a risk assessment because you have, lidded pens out on the floor, and is that going to create a hazard? And can you exempt from that, or, put in a mitigation that will allow you to continue to use those? So lots of areas that you may have to use a risk assessment that's not necessarily a required area. Check the chat here. Okay. Oh, and yeah, and Leanne put the link in the chat to our guidance documents. Leanne Chuboff is on the line. She is our VP for technical here at SQFI. So she's here. I think all members of our technical team are joined today. So I saw Christy and Gabby from training also here. So if you have any training questions, we can definitely address those today. And Elizabeth also for compliance is on the line as well. So we're all here to answer questions. My chat, Zoom does not like me today. Again, it's telling me it's oh. Okay, I'm back. For some reason, Zoom's not liking me today, so it keeps kicking me out. Okay, let me look at the chat. Okay, so we've got a question about training. So Carolina, you took the training for auditors and you need to start my audit hours. So what can I do? So we always recommend that you get in contact with a certification body and they will assist you in getting audit hours. DNV obviously is sponsoring this one today, but we do have 35 other CVs that can help you to get some of those audit hours. So yeah, reach out to them. If you have trouble, you can always email me, and I'll put my email address in the chat and ask me, because I know there are some specific CVs that are looking for bringing new auditors on board. So, okay, any other questions? We're here to help. Daniel's a great resource. So if you have any questions about the audit process itself, you know, how terrible was it? How good was it? Daniel, you use DNV, right? They're your certification bodies. That's correct.
Correct, for audits.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been good so far. I like that the auditors, they are always gonna try to help you to improve your process, right? The idea is not to come to show you what is wrong or to show you what you are doing wrong, but they are gonna help you to improve your process. The idea of the audit process is that your process is gonna be improved, right? So that's the major goal of the audit, because once you implement everything, everything that you need to get into the SQF certification, at the end, what you're looking for is how to improve everything and how the system is gonna help you to have a better safe product for your customers, right? So that's the goal that we are looking for with the audits, how the auditor becomes part of your team in order to improve everything at your plant.
Absolutely. Yeah, the auditor, they can't consult, but they can absolutely share best practices. They can clarify the code. If you reach out to technical, we can't consult either, because sure enough, I'll tell you, yes, you can do that. And then an auditor is going to come in and look at it and go, no, that's not right. So we don't consult, but I can clarify the code requirements. So if there's anything you don't understand, we certainly can clarify that. Any other questions? I know we're getting to about time that they're going to end the other breakout room and bring everybody back here. Monica says, what are some requirements you expect to see in a vulnerability assessment for a smaller company? So, the vulnerability assessment would be the same. The requirement's going to be the same for, depending on the size of the company is not necessarily going to depend on how that vulnerability assessment is going to be. You're still going to be looking at your vulnerability, which the ratings may be different because you're a smaller company, but the overall code requirement would be the same. So are you looking at specifically the food fraud vulnerability assessment? Is that the one you're specifically talking about? Yes. Okay. So yeah. And the vulnerability assessment too is based off of the specific ingredients that you're looking at and the products that you make. So, if you're a bakery and you use cinnamon, okay, Monica says pet food. So yeah, so you're going to look at, different things there because, based on history of ingredients, based on food fraud incidents in the pet food, and you can, again, Google is a friend. You have to, take all the information that you get off of the internet and really, do your own analysis of it. But, melamine in pet food was a thing, and, that was economically motivated, but then turned into a food defense issue because animals were getting sick, dying from it. So your vulnerability would be the same in a lot of instances, just based off of the ingredients that you're using. We've done some webinars on food fraud. So check that out. We may even have a guidance document on that. I'd have to specifically look. We're adding guidance documents on a regular basis. So eventually we'll get them all done. So if the food fraud one is not there yet, it will be. But lots of good information. And we've done some webinars on food fraud. So great question. Anything else? Thank you all for joining today. Do we have a question? Oh, maybe not. Sometimes we accidentally. The food sector category for fresh pasta and oven-ready pasta products. Ooh, Carolina, that's a good question. A lot of your oven-ready pasta products are going to fall under food sector category 20 for meals. So that is probably where a certification body would classify you as probably food sector category 20. Oh, we just got a message. So 1 minute, they're going to bring everybody back together, but that's probably where you would fall, would be under meals preparation. Okay, any other questions? Because they're bringing everybody back. So. Thank you all for joining today. I'm looking forward to hearing what some of you all do. some of your products. I know someone was talking about cell culture meat. We just saw where the FDA, I believe, approved chicken today or this week for sale here in the US. So very interesting. Oh, I did have someone ask, so do we deal with food safety and spices? Yes, spices would typically fall under food sector category 19 for food ingredient manufacturing. So we do have a lot of sites that do spices. And then of course we have a lot of sites that use spices. So they do that hazard analysis on spices all the time, as well as their food fraud vulnerability assessment. All right, well, I see everybody coming back in. I'm going to hand it off to Carrie and let her finish us out.
All right. We just had a great discussion in the other room. Something that we just landed on was talking about consultants versus auditors. And I'm not sure that we have more chat questions right now, but we do have time to take more questions. But in the meantime, while we wait for some to come in, Tammy, you want to speak to some of the problems you might have seen regarding auditors or companies expecting their auditor to be a consultant and what the difference is?
Right, exactly. So, we have about 600 auditors globally, and many of them have their own businesses. They also work for consulting businesses, and so they may be a consultant in addition to being an SQF auditor. However, they can't be both for you as a site. So if they're your consultant, they cannot be your auditor. And so our CB's certification bodies do a great job of, interviewing the auditors when they're getting assigned a site to determine if there's any conflict of interest. And if they've been your consultant at any time in the previous 2 years, they cannot be your auditor. So just be aware of that. But also I will say, when it comes to consultants, please check our website. We have a register where you can look up auditors. You can also look up SQF registered consultants. And so those are people that have met a minimum level of education, a minimum level of experience in SQF, and they also get registered by food sector category. So if you're we talked about spices. So if you're food sector category 19, food ingredients, and you want a consultant, please check our website because that means they've had SQF classes, they have experience in SQF, and find one that has food sector category 19 because that means they have experience in that. Just because because a consultant has our logo on their website does not mean they're registered with SQF to be an SQF consultant. Because I have consultants reach out to me all the time asking me technical questions because they have a client that they're trying to get SQF registered and they don't know the code. The consultant does not know the code. So check our website and make sure.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, we are happy to take more of your questions offline after the fact. And we put in the chat some contact information, but also here. We look forward to hearing from you and hope to see you in some of our training courses. Please visit our website. Great training courses available, especially for getting started. There's a new risk bundle out there that tells you all about the system elements and how to manage your risk and implementing a food safety plan. And there's implementing SQF as well that helps you with all the details of getting started. It goes into more depth than we went through today. So thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed it and learned some things that you can take action on right away to help improve your program. Like I said, please contact us. And I'd also just like to thank again, another round of applause for DNV, our headline sponsor here for this roundtable, and also for our supporting sponsors, the Hatchery of Chicago and Emerge CPG, both excellent resources for launching a new brand. I know they put their contact information in the chat, and I hope you were able to catch that. If not, please go visit their websites, and we're all looking forward to supporting you in your process. So Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.